The cowboy found the burned-faced black woman crying alone at the station, smoke still rising from the depot behind her. Zeke Thornfield pulled his horse to a halt and studied the scene through narrowed eyes. The woman sat crumpled on the wooden platform, clutching something charred against her chest. Her face bore fresh burns along the left side, angry red marks that spoke of recent violence. The last train car disappeared into the desert distance. She had missed her escape. Zeke dismounted slowly, boots hitting packed earth with deliberate weight. The woman's head snapped up at the sound. Her eyes held the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly what men could do when they set their minds to cruelty. "Ma'am." He kept his distance, hands visible. "You hurt." She pulled back against a wooden post, studying his face for signs of danger. "You one of them, come to finish what they started." The question hit him wrong, not the words themselves but the resignation beneath them. She expected the worst because the worst kept finding her. "No, ma'am. Just a man who knows what running looks like." The depot crackled behind them, orange flames licking at the roof beams. Someone had wanted this place to burn. Someone had wanted her trapped here when they did it. She looked down at the papers in her hands. Charred fragments fell between her fingers like black snow. "Don't matter now. Everything's gone." Zeke studied the horizon beyond her shoulder. Dust clouds moved toward them from the east. 3 riders, maybe 4. They would arrive within the hour. "Those your freedom papers." Her spine straightened. "What's it to you?" "Because burning a depot to destroy documents means someone's got plans for you. Bad ones." She followed his gaze to the approaching dust. Her breathing changed, shallow and quick. The fear in her eyes deepened into something closer to terror. "They said the train would wait." Her voice cracked. "Said I had until noon." Zeke checked the sun's position. 11:30. They had lied to her about more than just the schedule. They had planned this down to the minute. "What's your name?" "Delilah." She hesitated. "Delilah Brightwater." The surname meant something, but he could not place it. Not yet. "I'm Zeke. And Miss Brightwater, those riders coming aren't here for the scenery." She struggled to her feet, pressing the burned papers against her dress. The fabric was torn at the sleeve, singed at the hem. She had been close when they set the fire, too close. "I can handle myself." "Against 4 armed men. Against anyone who tries to drag me back." The words carried weight beyond their meaning. This was not just about land or money. This was about freedom itself, the kind that could be stolen with the right paperwork and enough violence to back it up. Zeke moved to his horse and checked the rifle in its scabbard. The approaching riders were close enough now to count. 4 men, riding hard, weapons visible even at distance. They moved with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was cornered. "Miss Brightwater, I don't know what you did or didn't do, but I know what those men are planning to do when they get here." She looked at the burned papers in her hands, then at the flames consuming the depot. Everything that proved her right to exist as a free woman was turning to ash. "Why should I trust you?" It was the right question. Too many men had proven unworthy of trust, especially men who found women alone and vulnerable. But the dust clouds were closer now, and trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. "Because I'm the only option standing between you and them." She studied his face, searching for the lie that would betray his intentions. Men had perfected the art of seeming helpful while planning harm. She had learned to read the signs in their eyes, their posture, the way they held their hands. Zeke extended his hand toward her, not demanding, not grabbing, offering. "Those men coming aren't here for Sunday service. You can trust me for the next 10 minutes, or you can explain to them why you're still breathing." The riders crested the far ridge. Their voices carried across the desert, rough laughter that spoke of men who enjoyed their work too much. One of them pointed toward the burning depot. Another spurred his horse faster. Delilah looked at Zeke's outstretched hand, at the approaching riders, at the flames that had consumed her proof of freedom. She took his hand. They rode hard through mesquite and scrub, dust marking their passage against the pale sky. Zeke kept his horse steady while Delilah held tight behind him, her burned papers pressed between them. The abandoned Copper Ridge mining camp appeared as the sun touched the western mountains, its skeletal structures casting long shadows across broken ground. Zeke helped her down near the old assay office. The building still held most of its roof, four walls that would hide their fire from distant eyes. She moved carefully, favoring her left side where the burns had blistered. "We'll rest here tonight. They won't track us in the dark." Delilah nodded but kept watching the horizon. Men who burned depots didn't quit when the sun went down. Inside the abandoned building, Zeke cleared debris from the floor while she settled against the far wall. He worked with military precision, checking corners, testing floorboards, positioning their supplies within easy reach. The movement spoke of a man who had made camp in hostile territory before. "You were Army." Her voice cut through the settling dust. "Was." He arranged his saddlebags near the door. "Long time back." She studied the neat way he folded his blanket, the careful placement of his rifle within arm's reach. "What happened?" "Same thing that happens to most soldiers. War ended." The lie hung between them, thin as smoke. Wars ended, but they left marks on the men who fought them. Marks that showed in how they slept light and trusted no one. Zeke pulled medical supplies from his pack. Bandages, a small bottle of whiskey, clean cloth torn from an old shirt. He set them beside her without speaking. "I can tend my own wounds." "Didn't say you couldn't." But he left the supplies there anyway. She looked at them, then at his face. Most men who offered help wanted something in return, payment of one kind or another. This one had asked for nothing except her trust for 10 minutes. The 10 minutes had stretched into 3 hours. She uncorked the whiskey and dampened the cloth. The burns along her cheek pulled tight when she pressed the makeshift bandage to them. Pain was nothing new. She had learned to carry it quietly. "Tell me about those papers." Delilah's hand stilled. "What about them?" "Someone burned down a depot to destroy them. That's not everyday desperation." She looked at the charred fragments spread across her lap, pieces of her life reduced to ash and memory. "They were my deed. Proof I owned the land legal." "Owned." Homestead up near Carson Valley, 40 acres of good ground, had a cabin, a well crop coming in. Her voice carried the weight of loss. "Had." Zeke settled against the opposite wall, close enough to hear her words but far enough to let her breathe. "What happened?" "Commissioner Crane happened. Said there was irregularities in my papers. Said I needed to come to town for questions." She touched the burns on her face. "When I got there, my place was already burning." The name hit Zeke wrong. Crane. Commissioner Aldrich Crane, the man who had signed his discharge papers with a smile. The man who had called his refusal to attack peaceful families an act of cowardice. His face must have shown recognition because Delilah leaned forward. "You know him." "Know of him." "That's not the same thing." Zeke stared at the darkening window. "No, it's not." She waited, but he offered nothing more. Men and their secrets, their careful walls built from old shame. She knew about walls, had built plenty of her own. "Where were you planning to go, on that train?" "Territorial capital. Find a judge who'd listen." She laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Thought justice might mean something if I could get to the right court. And now I got no papers, no proof, no witnesses." She touched her burned cheek. "Just the word of a woman against a commissioner." Outside, coyotes began their evening song, voices rising and falling across the desert. The sound spoke of hunger, of creatures that survived by knowing when to hunt and when to hide. Zeke reached for his pack and pulled out hardtack and dried meat, simple food but enough. He offered her half without ceremony. "I'm not some runaway if that's what you're thinking." "Didn't think you were." "Then what?" He chewed slowly, considering his words. "I'm thinking someone went to considerable trouble to make sure you couldn't prove what was yours." The truth of it settled between them. This was not random violence or simple theft. This was planned destruction, carried out with the backing of official power. "Crane's got reach," she said. "Controls half the county commissioners, most of the local law. Man crosses him, he finds ways to make problems disappear. Including the people who cause them." She met his eyes. "Especially the people." A sound carried across the desert, distant but distinct. dogs baying on a trail, bloodhounds following scent through the cooling air. Zeke was on his feet before the echo faded. He moved to the window and studied the darkness beyond. Points of light flickered in the distance, torches or lanterns marking the progress of riders who had not given up when darkness fell. How many men does Crane keep on his payroll? Enough. Delilah gathered the medical supplies, her movements quick and efficient. We need to move. Not yet. Zeke pulled items from his pack, working with the same precision he had shown earlier. Salt, pepper, small bottles of liquid that caught the moonlight. First we make them work for it. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Miss Brightwater, what I'm about to do might seem strange, but I need you to trust me a little longer. She studied his face in the pale light. How much longer? Until morning. After that, you can decide for yourself. The baying grew closer. She could hear individual voices now, men calling to each other across the broken ground. They moved with confidence, following a trail that led straight to the mining camp. What do you need me to do? Zeke handed her his rifle. If I don't come back in an hour, head north. Follow the ridge line until you reach the trading post. Ask for Maria Santos. Tell her Zeke sent you. Where are you going? But he was already moving into the darkness, leaving her alone with questions and the distant sound of approaching hunters. Zeke returned an hour before dawn, moving through shadows that still held the desert's chill. The hunting party had passed them by, following false trails he had laid through the arroyos. Their torches had disappeared into the southern darkness, chasing phantom scents through dead ground. Delilah lowered his rifle when she recognized his silhouette. Thought they had you. Thought they might too. He collected his scattered supplies, movements efficient in the gray light. We need to move. They'll backtrack when they realize what happened. They rode north as the sun painted the mountains gold. The trading post appeared after 2 hours, a cluster of adobe buildings around a well that had sustained travelers for decades. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, speaking of warm food and human comfort. Maria Santos emerged as they dismounted. A woman past 50, with silver threading her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She embraced Zeke without words, then studied Delilah with careful attention. You brought trouble, Ezekiel. Trouble found us first. Maria nodded toward Delilah's burned face. Come. We tend to wounds first, then talk. Inside the main building, Maria's hands worked gentle magic. Clean water, fresh bandages, salve that cooled the angry burns. She asked no questions while she worked, but her eyes spoke volumes. Delilah sat still under the ministrations. Kindness from strangers had become foreign territory. Too many hands had brought only pain. Better. Maria stepped back. Healing takes time, but the scars will fade. Some scars are meant to stay, Delilah said quietly. Some are. Others just remind us we survived what tried to kill us. Zeke spread Delilah's burned papers on Maria's kitchen table. The fragments looked even more damaged in the morning light, edges curled black, words lost to flame. But Maria leaned close, squinting at the surviving text. This signature. Her finger traced the barely visible marking. I've seen this before. Delilah's breath caught. Where? Land office records. My husband handled freight contracts for the territorial government. Maria disappeared into a back room, returning with a wooden box filled with official documents. Marcus Brightwater, he signed our permits. The blood drained from Delilah's face. She reached for the papers with trembling hands, comparing the signatures. Even through the burn damage, the match was clear. Judge Brightwater signed my deed. Her voice carried new weight. But he wasn't just any judge. He was my master, my owner, until he freed me and made me his legal daughter. The words hung in the kitchen air, heavy as storm clouds. Zeke set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Your father was Judge Marcus Brightwater, adoptive father. After his wife died, something changed in him. Said keeping humans as property was a sin against God. She touched the papers with reverence. When the war ended, he didn't just free me. He adopted me legal, made me his heir. Maria crossed herself. Judge Brightwater owned half of Carson County. All of it now belongs to me. The homestead was just the beginning. Delilah's voice strengthened. Crane isn't just stealing 40 acres, he's trying to claim thousands. Zeke stood and moved to the window, studying the empty horizon. When did your father die? 6 months ago. Natural causes, the doctor said. Heart just gave out. She paused. Crane showed up 3 days after the funeral with papers saying there were irregularities in the inheritance. What kind of irregularities? Said a slave couldn't inherit property, even one that was legally freed and adopted. Said the whole arrangement was invalid. The bitterness in her voice could have etched glass. Said I was lucky he was willing to let me homestead 40 acres instead of throwing me off the land entirely. Maria muttered something in Spanish that sounded distinctly unflattering toward Commissioner Crane. The law is clear. Adoption papers filed with the territorial court supersede any previous relationship. Try telling that to Crane. Delilah gathered the fragments carefully. He's got judges, lawyers, officials all saying what he wants them to say. Zeke turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. What did Crane do during the war? Profiteering mostly. Sold supplies to both armies depending on who paid better. Delilah's mouth twisted. Got rich while better men died. And after, bought his way into territorial politics. Commissioner's position came with a nice salary and access to land records. She met his eyes. Why? What did he do to you? The question hung between them. Maria busied herself with unnecessary tasks, giving them space to navigate whatever truth needed telling. Court-martial. The words came out flat, matter-of-fact. Refused to attack a peaceful village. Crane was the reviewing officer who signed my discharge. Dishonorable. Said I was unfit for military service. Cowardice in the face of the enemy. Zeke's hands clenched. The enemy being women and children who had done nothing but exist in the wrong place. Delilah studied his profile against the morning light. So you both got crossed by the same man. Seems so. Maria returned to the table, carrying a fresh pot of coffee and news that changed everything. Riders coming, 4 men pushing hard. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Zeke was already moving, gathering their supplies with practiced efficiency, but Maria raised her hand. There's another way, hidden room beneath the store. My husband built it during Apache troubles. She moved to a section of floorboards that looked identical to the rest. But once you're down there, you're committed. No way out if they find you. The sound of approaching horses carried through the morning air. Hoofbeats that spoke of men who had spent the night tracking false trails and found their tempers shortened by the experience. Delilah looked at Zeke. Your choice, fight or hide. Not my choice alone. She considered the burned papers in her hands, the thousands of acres they represented, the school she had dreamed of building for freed children. Then she looked at the approaching dust clouds. We hide. This fight's too big for just the 2 of us. Maria lifted the hidden panel, revealing a space large enough for 2 people and their gear. There's water down there and enough air for several hours. But whatever happens up here, you stay silent until I give the all clear. They descended into darkness as the first rider appeared on the horizon. Above them, Maria replaced the panel and began arranging her store as if nothing had changed. In the cramped space beneath the floor, Zeke and Delilah pressed close together, breathing the same stale air, listening to the approach of men who wanted to finish what they had started at the burning depot. The horses stopped directly overhead. Heavy boots crossed the floorboards above their heads. 4 sets, moving with the confidence of men who expected cooperation. Maria's voice carried through the wood, offering coffee and hospitality with the practiced ease of someone who had dealt with dangerous men before. Marshal Kellerman, what brings you to my humble establishment? The marshal's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Fugitives, Maria, dangerous ones. A man and a woman traveling together. Many people travel this road. Which ones concern you? The woman's got burns on her face, fresh ones. The man's likely armed, probably ex-military by his movement. A pause. They killed 3 of Crane's men last night. In the darkness below, Delilah's body went rigid against Zeke's. He touched her arm gently, a reminder to stay silent. The lie about killing was meant to justify whatever came next. I've seen no one matching that description. Maria's voice held steady. Perhaps they took the southern route toward Tucson. Footsteps moved through the store. Items shifted, knocked aside in a search that was more threat than investigation. They were looking for signs of recent visitors, evidence that someone had rested here. Funny thing about tracking fugitives, Maria, dogs don't lie, and my dogs led me straight to your door. Dogs follow many scents, coyotes, rabbits, travelers who passed days ago. But the confidence in Maria's voice had shifted slightly. The marshal was pressing harder than expected, asking questions that suggested he knew more than he was revealing. The floorboards creaked as someone heavy settled into a chair directly above them. Dust filtered down through the cracks, catching in Delilah's hair. She closed her eyes and controlled her breathing, fighting the urge to cough. Commissioner Crane's offering a substantial reward for information about these fugitives. $500 for the woman, $300 for the man. The marshal's voice carried the weight of serious money. That's enough to fix this place up real nice. If I had seen them, I would tell you. Would you? Or would you remember that favor you owe certain people? The temperature in the hidden room seemed to drop. Maria's debt to Zeke was no secret to men who made their living knowing other people's business. More footsteps. Someone was searching the back rooms now, opening doors, checking corners. The sound of furniture being moved, boxes pulled away from walls. A thorough search by men who understood the value of hidden spaces. Marshal, you're welcome to look wherever you need, but please be careful with my goods. I still have a business to run. Not if you're harboring criminals. The threat hung in the air like smoke. In the cramped space below, Zeke's hand moved to his knife. If they were discovered, it would be close quarters fighting with no room for mistakes. A new voice spoke up, younger and more eager than the marshal. Found something in the kitchen. 2 coffee cups, still warm. The silence stretched long enough for doubt to take root. Maria's explanation would need to be perfect. I had coffee with Father Miguel this morning. He blessed the new well before riding to Silver Ridge. Father Miguel rides a mule, not a horse, and there are fresh horse droppings outside. 2 horses from the look of it. The investigation was closing in. These men were more thorough than the night hunters, more patient. They knew their quarry was close. Floorboards groaned as the marshal stood. Maria, I'm going to ask you one more time. Have you seen the fugitives we're tracking? I have not. Then you won't mind if we wait here a while, rest our horses, have some of that coffee. Give those fugitives time to make mistakes if they're still in the area. The boots settled again, this time in different positions around the store. They were not leaving. The hidden room had become a trap with no exit except through discovery. Time crawled. Above them, the men made conversation about weather, horses, and territorial politics. Casual talk that revealed the scope of Crane's influence and the depth of his plans. Commissioners got big things planned for Carson County. Lots of development opportunities for the right investors. What about the current landowners? Most of them got irregular papers. War caused a lot of confusion about who owned what. Crane's just sorting things out legal-like. The euphemism drew chuckles from the other men. Legal sorting that involved burned homesteads and disappeared families. Word is he's planning a big land auction next week. Clear titles, territorial backing, legitimate buyers only. Sounds profitable. Very, especially for those who helped clear up the confusion. In the darkness, Delilah's fists clenched. They were discussing the theft of her inheritance as if it were a business transaction. Thousands of acres that her father had left to her, now being parceled out to Crane's associates. Hours passed. The men above showed no signs of leaving. They had food, water, and all the time in the world. Below, the air grew stale and close. Sweat beaded on Zeke's forehead despite the cool temperature. Near sunset, a new rider arrived. His horse was lathered with hard travel, and his news changed the tenor of the conversation. Marshal, Crane wants you in Silver Ridge tonight, says it's urgent. What's happened? Territorial judge is coming through. Unscheduled visit. Crane needs all his people there to make sure things go smooth. Kellerman cursed. What about the fugitives? Says to leave a man here in case they show up. Rest of us ride now. Chairs scraped as 3 men prepared to leave. One set of boots remained, pacing near the store's front window. A sentry who would watch for movement, listen for sounds that didn't belong. The other horses departed in a cloud of dust and urgent conversation. Above them, the remaining guard settled in for a long watch. He moved occasionally, checking sight lines, adjusting his position. A professional who understood his job. Night fell with agonizing slowness. In the cramped space, Zeke and Delilah pressed against each other, sharing breath and heat and the weight of growing desperation. The hidden room was secure, but it was also a coffin if they could not find a way out. Maria's voice drifted down occasionally, offering the guard food or conversation. He accepted the food but remained alert, suspicious of every sound and shadow. Near midnight, the guard's pacing became irregular. The chair creaked as he settled into it more heavily. Maria had been doctoring his coffee with something that would help him sleep without being obvious about it. The snoring began an hour later. Maria's gentle knock on the hidden panel was barely audible. They emerged from their prison like souls returning from the grave, muscles cramped and lungs hungry for clean air. The guard slept deeply in his chair, coffee cup fallen from slack fingers. Maria had prepared supplies for immediate travel, understanding that dawn would bring discovery and pursuit. "Silver Ridge," she whispered. "Why would Crane need all his men there for one judge?" Zeke checked his weapons, movements sharp with renewed purpose. "Because he's planning something that requires witnesses, something that needs to look legal." Delilah gathered her burned papers with hands that trembled slightly from hours of confinement. "The land auction, he's moving it up. Then we need to move faster." They slipped into the night, leaving the sleeping guard and the safety of Maria's hospitality. Silver Ridge waited ahead, and with it the final confrontation that would determine whether justice was possible in a territory built on stolen ground. Silver Ridge sprawled beneath them in the pre-dawn darkness, windows glowing with more lamplight than any small town should hold at such an hour. The courthouse dominated the main street, its windows blazing like a beacon against the desert night. Men moved between buildings with urgent purpose, preparing for something that could not wait for sunrise. Zeke and Delilah crouched behind weathered rocks on the overlooking ridge, studying the activity below. Every official building showed signs of occupation. Guards stood at strategic corners. This was not the sleepy territorial outpost they had expected to find. "Auctions today," Delilah whispered, "has to be more than that." Zeke pointed toward the courthouse steps, where workers were constructing a platform. "They're making a show of it." Below them, Silver Ridge hummed with corrupted energy. Men who should have been sleeping were instead preparing for the largest land grab in territorial history. Crane had turned the entire town into his personal kingdom, and today he would make it official. They worked their way down the slope, using shadows and early morning mist as cover. The town's outskirts held families who looked like they had not chosen to be there. Makeshift camps, worried faces, the quiet desperation of people who had lost everything and were waiting to see what came next. An elderly black woman tended a small fire near the creek. Her eyes met Delilah's across the growing light, recognition passing between them without words. Another displaced landowner, another victim of Crane's systematic theft. "They took the Henderson place yesterday," the woman said quietly. "Said the papers were irregular, burned them right there in front of the family." Delilah knelt beside the fire, accepting the offered cup of chicory coffee. "How many families?" "Dozen, maybe more. All of us had good land legal deeds. All of us got the same story about irregularities." Zeke studied the courthouse through the morning haze. "Where are they keeping the territorial judge?" "Ain't seen hide nor hair of any judge. Just Crane's men and a lot of fancy talk about legal proceedings." The truth settled between them heavy as stone. There was no territorial judge. The entire story had been fabrication, an excuse to gather all of Crane's men in one place for the final act of his conspiracy. "They're planning to legitimize everything at once," Delilah said. One big auction, territorial backing, no questions asked afterward. The old woman stirred her fire with a stick worn smooth by years of use. What can 3 people do against a whole town? It was the right question. The impossible question. They were outnumbered 50 to 1, outgunned, and fighting a system designed to crush anyone who challenged its authority. But Zeke was studying the courthouse with new interest. Maybe we don't need to fight the whole town. Maybe we just need to prove the whole thing's built on lies. They spent the morning moving through the displaced families, learning the scope of Crane's operation. Each family told the same story. Legal land ownership followed by sudden questions about paperwork. Official investigations that found irregularities in deeds that had been valid for years. Forced sales at prices that amounted to theft. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Someone had been systematically targeting specific landowners, people whose property would be valuable to the right buyers, people who could not fight back effectively against territorial authority. As the sun climbed higher, more officials arrived in town. Men in expensive suits who looked like they had money to spend on freshly stolen land. The auction would have legitimate buyers, which would make the theft look legal to anyone who asked questions later. Delilah watched the preparations from their hiding spot near the old church. We need proof. Something that shows the whole operation is fraudulent, or someone who can testify to it. Who's going to believe us against Commissioner Crane? Zeke had been thinking the same thing. But something nagged at him, a detail that did not fit the pattern they had observed. All these families lost their land in the past 6 months. All of them had legal deeds signed by territorial judges. But where did those judges go? The question hung in the morning air. Territorial judges were appointed positions, not easily replaced or relocated. If Crane was claiming irregularities in their signatures, the judges themselves would need to verify those claims. Unless they couldn't, Delilah said quietly. They looked at each other across the growing realization. The missing judges were not missing by accident. They were being kept somewhere, probably forced to sign whatever documents Crane put in front of them. The courthouse has a basement, the old woman said when they asked about the building's layout. Used to be the jail before they built the new one, still got the bars on the windows. Zeke felt pieces clicking into place. He's keeping them there. The judges, maybe other officials who wouldn't cooperate, forcing them to legitimize his operations. Including my father, the possibility hit Delilah hard enough to steal her breath. Judge Marcus Brightwater, who had legally adopted her and left her his estate. If he was alive, if Crane was keeping him prisoner, then every document signed in the past 6 months was fraudulent. But it also meant they had been operating under false assumptions. Her father was not dead from natural causes. He was trapped in the basement of the Silver Ridge courthouse, forced to sign away the property he had meant to leave to his daughter. The afternoon brought more buyers, more officials, more signs that tonight's auction would reshape the territorial landscape permanently. Once the sales were complete and recorded, challenging them would require years of legal battles that displaced families could not afford. As evening approached, Zeke and Delilah made their way toward the courthouse through alleys that reeked of corruption and fear. The building's basement windows were indeed barred, but lamplight flickered behind them. Someone was down there, awake and possibly waiting for rescue. The first window they checked showed an empty cell. The second revealed office furniture and stacks of legal documents. The third window changed everything. Judge Marcus Brightwater sat at a small table, signing papers with hands that shook from exhaustion or illness. He looked older than his years, worn down by months of captivity. But he was alive, and his signature was validating every theft Crane had orchestrated. Delilah pressed her face against the bars, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her father looked up at the sound, squinting into the darkness beyond the window. Delilah, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Papa, I'm going to get you out. You shouldn't have come, it's too dangerous." But relief flooded his features. "I thought they had killed you in the fire." "They tried." She touched her scarred face. "But I found help." Judge Brightwater's eyes shifted to Zeke, studying his face in the dim light. "Young man, you need to get my daughter away from here. Tonight they're planning something that will make everything they've done legal and permanent. The auction. More than that. They're going to record all the land transfers with territorial authority. Once that happens, challenging the sales becomes nearly impossible." His voice strengthened with urgency. "They've been forcing me to sign documents for months. Every deed, every transfer, every bit of paperwork they needed to steal thousands of acres from legitimate owners." Zeke studied the window bars, testing their strength. "Can you be ready to move when we come back?" "Where are you going?" Delilah met her father's eyes through the iron bars. "To stop an auction." Above them, the courthouse prepared for an evening that would legitimize the largest land theft in territorial history. But in the basement, hope had taken root in the darkness, and tomorrow's sunrise would bring either justice or the final victory of corruption over truth. The courthouse filled as the sun touched the western mountains. Men in expensive suits occupied the front rows while displaced families pressed against windows from outside, watching their stolen futures being auctioned to the highest bidders. Commissioner Crane stood behind the podium, radiating the confidence of a man who had planned every detail. Zeke moved through the crowd, positioning himself near the center aisle. His worn trail clothes marked him as someone who did not belong among the buyers, but no one paid attention to drifters in a room full of money. At precisely 7 o'clock, Crane called the assembly to order. His voice carried the authority of official position, backed by territorial law and enforced by armed men stationed throughout the room. "Gentlemen, we gather tonight to resolve irregularities in land ownership that have plagued this territory for too long. All properties offered tonight have been thoroughly investigated and cleared for legitimate sale." Polite applause from the buyers. Outside the windows, the displaced families watched in silence as their heritage prepared to change hands. The first property offered was the Henderson Farm, 40 acres of prime river bottom that had supported 3 generations. Crane described the land's features and improvements with the enthusiasm of a man selling something he had never earned. Opening bid is $50, a fraction of the land's true value. The buyers understood they were participating in theft disguised as legal procedure, but theft that would be backed by territorial authority once the paperwork was filed. Zeke waded through the first 3 sales, letting the momentum build. The buyers grew more confident with each successful transaction, convinced they were participating in legitimate business. The fourth property offered belonged to Delilah, 40 acres that represented the smallest portion of her true inheritance, but the piece Crane had chosen to steal first. The Brightwater Homestead, 40 acres of improved land with cabin, well, and cleared fields. Recent investigation revealed serious irregularities in the original deed. Zeke stood. "What kind of irregularities?" The question cut through the auction's rhythm. Crane's eyes found him in the crowd, recognition dawning slowly. "Sir, this is not a forum for discussion. If you wish to bid, please do so." "I'm asking about the irregularities. What made a legal deed suddenly invalid?" Murmurs rippled through the room. The buyers had not expected challenges to the process they were funding. This was supposed to be simple commerce, not a legal debate. The territorial investigation found that the original deed was signed under questionable circumstances. "The matter has been resolved through proper legal channels." "Which territorial investigator? I'd like to see the paperwork." Crane's composure cracked slightly. He gestured toward Marshal Kellerman, who began moving through the crowd toward Zeke. "Sir, you're disrupting official proceedings. I'm asking for proof of your claims." The room's atmosphere shifted. What had been comfortable corruption was becoming public confrontation. Several buyers looked toward the exits, unwilling to be associated with anything that might attract unwanted attention. Outside the courthouse, Delilah moved through the basement shadows. The building's lower level held more than just Judge Brightwater. 3 other territorial officials sat in separate cells, all bearing the worn look of men who had been coerced for months. She found her father exactly where they had seen him before. His eyes met hers through the bars, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Delilah, this is madness. There are too many of them. Papa, I need you to be ready. When I open this cell, we're going upstairs. They'll never let us leave alive. They'll never let us leave alive anyway." She worked at the lock with tools Zeke had given her, simple implements that could open simple mechanisms if used with patience. The lock was old, designed to hold drunks and petty criminals rather than determined prisoners. The metal clicked open just as shouting erupted from the floor above. In the auction room, Zeke's questions had created enough disruption to draw attention from buyers and officials alike. Crane tried to restore order, but doubt had taken root among men who preferred their corruption served with official legitimacy. "Perhaps we should examine the documentation before proceeding," suggested a well-dressed buyer in the front row. "Ensure everything is properly recorded." Other voices joined the call for transparency. Men who were willing to buy stolen land were not necessarily willing to defend the theft in territorial court if questions arose later. Kellerman reached Zeke's position just as the basement door opened behind Crane's podium. Judge Marcus Brightwater emerged, supported by his daughter, followed by the three other officials who had been held prisoner for months. The room fell silent. Judge Brightwater's voice carried despite his physical weakness. "Commissioner Crane, you are under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy against territorial law." Crane's face went white. "Judge Brightwater died 6 months ago. This is some kind of impersonation." "I assure you, I am quite alive, as are Judges Mitchell and Torres and Territorial Clerk Harrison, all of whom you have held prisoner while forcing us to sign fraudulent documents." The buyers began moving toward the exits, no longer interested in land that came with this much legal complication. Money could buy many things, but not protection from territorial marshals asking uncomfortable questions. Kellerman found himself caught between competing authorities. Crane had paid his salary, but Judge Brightwater carried legal jurisdiction that superseded any local arrangement. "Marshal," the judge continued, "I am formally charging Commissioner Crane with multiple felonies against territorial law. You will arrest him immediately or face charges yourself as an accessory." The moment balanced on the edge of violence. Crane's other men positioned themselves around the room, hands near weapons, waiting for orders that would determine whether this ended in justice or bloodshed. Zeke moved closer to Delilah, ready to shield her if the situation collapsed into chaos. But Kellerman surprised everyone by drawing his weapon and pointing it not at the judge but at Crane. "Commissioner, you're under arrest." The fight went out of Crane all at once. His grand scheme had depended on secrecy and official backing. With 4 territorial officials ready to testify against him, and a room full of witnesses to his fraudulent auction, resistance would only add to his legal troubles. Over the following weeks, the truth emerged in its full scope. Dozens of families received their land back. The territorial government invalidated every document signed under coercion. Crane and his associates faced charges that would keep them in territorial prison for decades. Judge Brightwater recovered his health slowly, aided by his daughter's devoted care and the satisfaction of seeing justice restored. The school Delilah had dreamed of rose on their reclaimed land, welcoming children from every family that had been wronged. Zeke found purpose he had not expected, helping to build something lasting instead of running from his past. His military skills served a different cause now, protecting families who were learning to trust in law and community again. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children had gone home, Delilah and Zeke would sit on the school's front steps and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. The scars on her face had faded but remained visible, markers of survival rather than shame. The land stretched before them, reclaimed and free, supporting the dreams that corrupt men had tried to steal. In the end, justice had proven stronger than greed, and trust had grown from the ashes of a burned depot where a cowboy had offered his hand to a stranger in need. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.